Prince Andrew.
Yes.
Two big developments related to Prince Andrew over the weekend. One is more revelations in Virginia Giuffre's book, and she, of course, committed suicide, having been a victim of abuse. And she's in her memoirs, which are published tomorrow, but early excerpts have revealed. She talked about being sexually abused by her family, her father, and a family friend as a child, and then being targeted by Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. This is a very normal story, sadly, because abusers know the girls and the boys to target. They know what they're doing, and then being abused, saying she feared that she was going to die as a sex slave, being subjected to horrific sadomasochistic abuse and choking, goodness knows what, by Jeffrey Epstein and the friends of his that she was handed around to. More details about her claim that she had sex 3 times with Prince Andrew. The third one in basically an orgy with a bunch of women who were girls under the age of 18. In her belief, she thinks she was around 18. Now, again, Prince Andrew has always denied ever having even met, let alone having sex. Virginia Giuffre, despite the photograph and all the allegations, and, of course, paying £12 million to her the way you do. As I've always said, I mean, who of us has not paid £12 million to someone accusing us of a crime when we haven't even met them? But there we are. We've all made that mistake, have we not? There's no doubt at all that her publishing Beyond the Grave is more damaging because, look, she committed suicide. She's obviously had a very troubled life. Yet, do you think if you've been the victim of abuse and you've been sex trafficked? Now, again and again, also, more lies have emerged about, crucially, just ahead of the weekend, about these latest email revelations that have come out of America, that, of course, once again, yet more proof that Prince Andrew lied during that interview for Newsnight and Emily Maitlis when he said, he'd broke off contact with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, we know he hadn't. We knew. He'd basically in contact, and also he basically wanted dirt on Virginia Giuffre. Crucially, he basically got hold of her social security number, her date of birth. He was convinced she had a criminal record and gave it to his close protection officer. And we know this because in his own words, in his email that he wrote himself to the Queen's deputy press secretary, he said, I'm going to basically get some dirt on her, effectively. Now, illegal for a police officer, illegal to ask a police officer to commit a crime, because it would be illegal for a police officer to do that, likely to face police investigation. Unlikely anything would come of it, because that's what happens with the royal family. Remember those bags of cash that Prince Charles got given? That's all gone away, right? I'm sorry, that is what happens in this country.
Come on.
But no, that's literally what happens in this country. But we've had him stripped of what? He's been told you can't use the Duke of York, you can't use whatever other random stupid titles he's got. But he is still a prince. He was born a prince because he's the son of the late Queen. Lots of calls for him to not only face police investigation, but also, literally just disappear. Why are you in this big house? What are you living off? Where is your income from? Are taxpayers paying for any of it? Why have you got a title at all? Do you think that he should be stripped of all his titles? Do you think that, and by the way, this requires a parliamentary act, that even a nanosecond of the country's time in the Commons should be used to do this? Where do you stand?
Well, firstly, I think Parliament has got better things to do than to deal with this man and his titles. The second thing I would say is, to be fair to the King, he has acted, in my view, pretty decisively. This is his own brother, someone he was...
but he hates him. This is long-standing.
But even
there's no love lost.
Look, however much you squabble with your siblings, there is a degree of love and familial affection here, and it would not be pleasant for anyone, not least the King, who's in the midst of cancer treatment, to have to break out of his time out of his diary last week to... Basically, it looks like he had to threaten his brother with an act of Parliament. That's certainly what the Sunday papers are saying. To say, you have to give up all of your titles. You have to publicly humiliate yourself, because he has. In doing this, he's basically made another further admission of guilt.
That is what it looks like, sorry.
In order to save the reputation of the family. That cannot have been easy. And the King, credit to him, did so. Now, plenty of people will say, why did it take until now? I would say this, it wasn't known categorically, provably, until last week that Andrew had lied, that he had lied to his own family, that he'd lied to his own mother, to his brother, about the extent and the times of which he had contact with Jeffrey Epstein. What we saw last week was the fact that Andrew has been going around basically, and I apologise for putting it this highly, as a bit of a con man, trying to persuade everybody around of this nonsense story that
No one believed
regrettably.
it.
Well,
no one believed it. Here's the thing, and this is the thing about the royal family. This is my issue, is that, okay, all that time that he wrote that letter he wrote that email. We've seen the email to the Queen's Deputy Press Secretary. When he was going off and staying with a convicted child sex trafficker, okay, he solicited young underage girls for for prostitution. He was already convicted of that. He went off and said that. He takes his security team with him. You don't think that the Met high-level, close protection team, they don't all discuss things. There's no way in the world that who he met, where he was not known to the upper echelons of the police, and that this was not passed on to the press secretary of the Queen, and that the Queen was or was not informed. There's no way in the world that senior Met police officers and that senior royal, certainly royal officials, didn't know this stuff. Now, I suspect that Prince Charles, when he was Prince Charles, did know a lot of this stuff, and his mum was just left. We've all met people who are like, oh, my son can do no wrong. Yeah. And she obviously had this complete blind spot for Prince Andrew, clearly her favourite child, and she had this complete blind spot for him, and I'm afraid he was able to get away with stuff which he shouldn't have been able to get away with. I'm sorry, I don't know a single person who believed a single word of anything he said in that Newsnight interview.
I did, but what he said was so stupid and idiotic that was enough to damn him.
Yeah.
That was the thing, actually. There was, until this week, a perfectly plausible story that Andrew was, if not nice but dim, something mildly akin to that, maybe a bit worse than that, but not much worse. We now know that he lied to his own mother's face, he's lied to his own brother's face, and as a result, he's been stripped of everything that he's ever had.
I'm sorry, the 12 million quid is the giveaway. The 12 million quid is the giveaway. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. There's a photograph of him with the woman he says he never met, for goodness sake. Let's talk about our energy bills. Let's face it, we spend quite a lot of time talking about our bills these days, given how much we've seen inflation go up over recent years. And even though the energy bills went sky high and then came down a bit, they're still, well, at least double what they were a few years ago. But why are they still so sky high? Well, according to Ed Miliband, we're going to make you all poor and plunge you back into pre-industrial ages Secretary Ed Miliband, he seems to think that it's got nothing to do with him, Gov, and it's because we rely on wholesale gas prices. But then why are we paying so much more than every other country that also relies on international wholesale gas prices? Well, I think Andy Mayer, my next guest, may have the answer. He's an energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the free market think tank. Good morning to you, Andy.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Ed Miliband was off doing the rounds and the TV studios yesterday morning, looking, I've got to be honest with you, more religiously psychotic than he has done. It's getting worse every single time I see him on television. But he was absolutely adamant that in no way is the fact that our energy price is going up so much and that we've got all these renewables and all these extra costs that are added onto our energy prices. In no way is that anything to do with why our energy prices are so sky high, despite the fact that Labour manifesto last year said categorically they would cut our energy bills by £300, and they've actually gone up rather than down.
Yes. So poor old Ed is stuck in 2022 when the price of gas was extremely high because of the start of the Ukraine conflict. And a lot of Ed's friends in the renewable industry got very excited and said that, well, it's now clear that gas is 9 times more expensive than renewables, which was a bit of dodgy accounting at the time and is completely untrue today, where although gas is not as cheap as it used to be, it's not the main driver of costs. And the really exciting thing that happened last week was there was a sudden outbreak of truth-telling by the various energy supply companies that far too often in the last 20 years have been sitting there just agreeing with whatever the government said. And now they say, well, actually, Ed, no, it's your policy costs, mate. Those are the things that are driving energy prices. And this was
at a select committee hearing where they were asked, well, why are prices so high? And they said the quiet bit out loud.
Yeah, and the really important comment they made was that even if the price of gas fell to zero, our costs would still rise, our bills would still rise. And that has to be due to policy costs. And principally, it's due to things like expanding the national grid to have a more distributed renewable energy system. It's due to the subsidies that the energy generators in the renewable sector are demanding because they're scared a future government might take them away. It's due to the cost inflation they've experienced with their own supply chains, because when everybody in the world tries to do renewables at the same time, as you can imagine, the capacity doesn't keep up. So it's just not very wise to keep pushing on this clean power plan to 2030 when the cost is so high.
He is absolutely, he is proper Greta Thunberg style zealot on this, absolutely determined. And he constantly goes on, one of the things he always goes on about is about how, you know, instead of being reliant on tyrannical, despotic states for our gas and our oil, it's like, we get most of our gas and oil from America and from Norway. We don't get it from Putin or you know, even the Saudis anymore.
Whereas we get our solar panels from China, almost 90% of them, which is quite a considerable risk when we consider all the other things in the news at the moment.
And if he's got a problem with despots, maybe worry about Xi Jinping of China.
Well, quite. I mean, his heart is in the right place. He wants to save the world from climate change.
No. He's not. His heart. No, I don't even accept that. This is the idea. The people who are trying to impoverish us, when they and we are, you know, we are means to an end. That they're nice people. The communists thought they were nice people too. Frankly, so did the Nazis. Genuinely, they thought they were doing the right thing. No, he's not a good person. He's not doing it. This is an anti-capitalist move. Anti-capitalism is, by definition, going to plunge us into poverty. Making people poorer isn't a nice thing.
Yeah, so obviously we'd share the view on the anti-capitalism. I mean, there's far too much of the Green movement that's rooted in the idea of trying to control people through climate change as an excuse.
Yeah.
But if we get back to brass tacks, he doesn't actually need to do much to rescue the situation. He could reverse his policies on the North Sea, so we've got access to our own resources, the hedge against whatever other plans he has. He should cancel the next round of renewable subsidy bids because they're far too expensive already and they're much higher than the wholesale price of electricity. I believe that he's thinking about removing VAT from energy bills, which would be...
Well, he's not. He doesn't have any say over that. But come on, who are we kidding? Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, needs every penny she can get. She's not going to take VAT off energy bills.
Well, it's been rumoured, and it might not be a bad thing, because that is just a cost of government, and it's one of the advantages of Brexit that you have the ability to do that, because the old 5% rate relates to very odd EU rules at the time. But it will, you'll get some of that back from the increased spending, or you would if you hadn't spent the money already on renewable subsidies. So the bills, you might not even, they might do that. You might not even notice in your bills.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, but it's fascinating. He's still making all these claims about how he's going to create 400,000 more jobs by 2030 in the clean energy sector. I mean, this is just pie in the sky stuff.
Well, I first wrote about this in 2018 because it's the Jeremy Corbyn pledge. So it's boring deep from the well of Jeremy's far left agenda. And it's nonsense. I mean, you've got to look at both sides of the balance sheet when you start talking about subsidies being used to drive industry. Now, there are a small number of circumstances where if the government spends money on something, it creates a new industry, and that new industry creates growth and jobs. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about transferring money from one sector to another. Yeah. And you can see the damage that he's doing to North Sea jobs with his crazy policies. And you can see the damage he's doing to jobs across the economy through the higher price of energy, through the higher price of everything. So it's nothing new. It's just a very skillful way of trying to spin the politics as though he cares about jobs and everybody who disagrees with him doesn't. Well, it's nonsense. Yeah, absolutely. Andy Mayer, energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, thank you very much indeed for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, the reality is, I mean, this is all just, I mean, utter madness. But there's the zealotry of Ed Miliband is quite extraordinary. You can see when he's interviewed, he does this thing, he sort of looks up and he just goes into his sort of his spiel. And the number of things he says are just patently, provably untrue. It's quite terrifying. I do feel a little sorry for the guy sometimes. Why? Because well, he signed up to this mad scheme, which was always going to fail, but it was just about tenable when the US, China, Brazil, etc. were all going to get on board with it as well. They have changed it, and he's now coming back into office to try and finally do it. He's had the carpet pulled under his feet, and now we're in this mad world in which we've got industrial energy in this country that costs 4 times as much as it does in the United States. They're not bothering to do anything, and he is basically signing a death knell for the Britain's industrial sector altogether. Yeah, well, but he shouldn't be allowed to. He's a danger to us. I don't understand. He's not a nice guy. He's a religious zealot. And extremist religious folk, whatever their religious views, and his is green, are all dangerous people, in my view. Let's talk about the enormous question marks dangling over the future of Gaza, with what look like, end to
tenuous ceasefire we've been in for the past week, where we've seen 2 IDF soldiers who have died. Israel claims at the hands of Hamas, and retaliation. Claims hospitals claiming some 45 people in Gaza have been killed. Now, how many of those were actually, let's face it, actually killed by Hamas, who've been going around executing anyone they darn well feel like, it would certainly appear? We don't know, but we know that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are heading over to Israel amid concerns about the Gaza ceasefire. What do you make of what's going on?
Yeah, the ceasefire is in a bit of trouble. I mean, this is not unusual for when a conflict comes to an end. Yeah. It does often drag on. I mean, not only for days, but sometimes for years. These things are hard to fix. But what I find so striking is that already we have leftists across the UK, across Europe, in fact, accusing Israel of breaking the ceasefire, when in fact Hamas has broken it many times over the past week. They have failed to return the deceased hostages that they promised they would return as part of phase 1. They are shooting Palestinians left and right, who they accuse of plotting with Israel or being spies for Israel, all that kind of usual nonsense. That's a violation of this supposed end to violence as well. And yet, of course, the finger is always pointed at Israel. It's always the same old story. You know, some of these leftists and posers in the West, they're basically the Lord Haw-Haws for Hamas. They are doing its propagandistic bidding. And I find that really worrying. Yeah,
I mean, certainly. I mean, some of the newspaper reports and the web reports yesterday are just, you know, it's always Israel claims, Hamas says. It's just, I mean, everything is reported as fact from Hamas. I mean, I'm like you know, I take pretty much every area of authority. Anyone saying something to me with a pinch of salt and show me the evidence. But on balance, I'm going to choose to believe a government over a terrorist organisation. This, of course, what's been going on in Israel has massively dominated British politics in the last couple of years. We've seen the march on the streets. We've seen, of course, the horrific attack on a synagogue in Manchester just a few weeks ago, in which 2 men died by a man who, you know, basically was claiming this is for the children, you know, basically because all these reports of genocide against children in Gaza that we've seen on our television screens. Again, absolute lies, complete the whole thing, absolute lies. It's a war zone. People die in war zones, and it's terrible. But the latest development at the end of last week, and it's still ongoing, still no decision, is over this big football match. This is due to take place on the 6th of November between Tel Aviv Maccabi and Aston Villa in Birmingham. And we had that extraordinary decision by the sort of Birmingham, safety advisory group, councillors, police and others, that actually it was unsafe for this match to go ahead. And we've seen various different claims about, was it unsafe for the people of Birmingham? Was it unsafe for Aston Villa fans? Was it unsafe, as was claimed at one point, for Israel, Tel Aviv Maccabi fans, because they would not be able to be kept safe from whoever? It was never explained who. And then it was about policing resources. The Prime Minister stepped in. The Home Secretary apparently stepped in, although apparently not bothered when she first heard about it. What is the latest now? And has that decision been in any way affected by the decision to call off, basically a derby match in Tel Aviv between Maccabi and another rival Tel Aviv team?
I think the Aston Villa decision by that safety group is an outrageous decision. It really, really is. And now, does Maccabi Tel Aviv have some rowdy fans and possibly some hooligans? Of course it does. Every football club does, pretty much. We have a lot of them here in the UK. Russian fans behave badly. All sorts of fans behave badly. But the vast majority of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are decent, law-abiding people who love to watch football. And that who is being banned from coming to this country and attending a game. It is really actually quite grotesque. And my view is that if it's not safe for Jews, whether they're Jews from Israel or Jews from Britain, to attend a public event, then that event should be called off. There should be no football match, no cultural event, no street, no city, no town in which Jews are not safe. And if there is, then we have a serious sickness in this society, and I think that's what's been revealed.
And it is extraordinary, the same argument that is being used by the people who are also, we've got a load of councillors, we've got a load of supposedly independent MPs, you know, the Hezbollah bunch of pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza MPs, basically all saying the same thing, which is, you know, just that, well, you know, this is Israel's committing a genocide, we shouldn't have any of their teams here, that's what's unacceptable, you know, and it's all, let's face it, it's all code for we don't like Jews. That's That's how I read it, I'm afraid. But the same argument that, well, it's not safe, it's simply not safe, so it shouldn't be allowed to go ahead. Well, I don't think things aren't safe when we have those pro-Palestinian marches every other week in London, and lots of people don't feel safe. I would be quite happy to wander around with my Israeli flag along around the streets of London, being a proud supporter of the state of Israel and the right to exist. But I think that I would probably be arrested by the police for being provocative, or if I had a Star of David necklace, that would be provocative. And so clearly that's not safe either. But this is the thing. One of the justifications has been that there's been trouble with these fans before, and this is all centred on what happened in Amsterdam, was it last year, involving Ajax fans. Now, the thing is, you read the court reports about this, it wasn't fans on either side that were causing the trouble. It was basically, and they used the phrase, people, who are we kidding? It was a bunch of extremist radical Islamists who went on what they called in their WhatsApp groups a Jew hunt. Yep. A Jew hunt. And they basically chased down these Tel Aviv fans deliberately because they were Jewish. And actually, it wasn't even the Ajax fans that were involved. This was made very clear. And there was some response and, angry reaction from the Tel Aviv Maccabi fans, and I think understandably in the circumstances. And then we've seen what happened in the football derby in Tel Aviv, cancelled over the risk to human lives. Basically, we had the Hapoel fans let off a load of flares in their own colours, and the match had to be abandoned, and then there was trouble outside. But there's no evidence, again, that it was Tel Aviv Maccabi fans who were involved in starting it or being a part of it. People are looking for any possible excuse, but we are just fundamentally in that situation where we've got a majority Muslim city, our second city in this country, where effectively Muslim self-appointed community leaders, councillors, some other MPs are basically saying, we control what happens here. We decide how it's policed. We decide who is policed, and we decide who gets to come here. And if you don't like it, there's going to be trouble. That does not sit well.
That's so well described. That is what's happening. I think this country is surrendering to the Islamist mob. That's essentially what's happening here, and that's what's been happening for the past 2 years. And it really, not only does it not sit well, it's gone way, way too far. And I think a lot of people are waking up to this. Think about what we've seen in parts of the country over the past couple of years and in recent weeks. We've seen people in Islamist clothing, women in the burqa, men in Islamist dress, chanting Zionists off our streets. We know what that means. We're not stupid. We weren't born yesterday. We know it means no Jews. We've seen people saying, long live the Intifada. Now we have people celebrating because Jewish fans from Israel will be forbidden from attending a match. Yeah. This is Islamist tyranny on the streets of the United Kingdom, and we keep bowing down to it time and time again. And you're absolutely right about Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, it was a mini pogrom against the fans from Tel Aviv. It was a Jew hunt, as you said, by mostly Arab men, gangs of mostly Arab immigrants who made fun of Jews, who made jokes about Hitler in their WhatsApp groups, who said, let's beat up some effing Jews, and they did. One of the attacks on a Maccabi fan was so bad that the perpetrator was accused of attempted murder. Yeah. This is how serious it was. And people aren't talking about that because they hate Maccabi Tel Aviv. And more importantly, they hate the fact that they are Jews.
Well, indeed. And the thing is, you just said this is surrendering to the Islamist mob. And again, it's very important to make a distinction between people who are supporters of a radical Islamist ideology, which is very, very dangerous. And frankly, we need to go out of this country. I'm sorry, I don't want it here. Don't want it anywhere, but I definitely don't want it here. And also moderate Muslims. But here's the thing. Because we have, was it 4, 5, 6 million Muslim people living in this country? I don't believe at all that the majority of those people want walk around with this level of hatred in their heart. I refuse to believe that. I'm sorry, people say I'm naive. I refuse to believe that. But we're going to need to have some moderate Muslim voices speaking up, more than just one odd community leader speaking up and saying no. These people are welcome in our city, the city which we've made our home, in Britain, where we ascribe to the tolerant and welcoming, diversity that we're told so much about on the left, and we will act ourselves to ensure they are safe, if necessary. We will speak out against the Islamist extremists to make sure those people are safe. Now, that's, I'm afraid, what we're going to need to do, because I know there are people like you and me who speak up, on behalf of Israel, on behalf of British Jews in this country, even though we are not Jewish ourselves, and have no sort of, link with the country of Israel at all before these horrific events over the last couple of years. But, you need people who will speak up and who will say, no, not on my watch, not in my name. Where are those people?
I could not agree more. And I completely agree with you. The vast majority of Muslims in this country are good, law-abiding people who just want to get on with their lives. They are not all the radical Islamists screaming blue murder about the Jewish state morning, noon and night. That's really true. But you're right. We need more voices. There are some brilliant groups like Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. There are ex-Muslim groups who talk about the importance of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. There are great Muslim commentators making brilliant points about the scourge of anti-Semitism, the scourge of Israelophobia. There are voices out there, but there are not enough. And the tragic fact for our law-abiding Muslim communities is that a lot of this is being done in their name, falsely, by people who claim to represent them but have never been voted for by them. These extremists do claim to speak for Muslim feeling, for Muslim sentiment. If I was an ordinary Muslim going about my daily business, I would say, screw you, you don't speak for me. When we start hearing more of that, that's when we know we will have reached a positive turning point. But sadly, it's not coming yet.
It absolutely is not. These grooming gangs and, the accusations that Labour is trying to sabotage the grooming gangs inquiry. Let's talk to Jonathan Taylor. He's a child safeguarding consultant and former detective, spent 15 years in child abuse investigations. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Morning, Julia. Good to
very much appreciate you joining us. I mean, look, this is an incredible worry when two of the survivors of these grooming gangs have both chosen to resign very publicly from the liaison panel helping to decide the remit of this inquiry, but also crucially who chairs the inquiry. Does it surprise you that A, it's taken 4 months and they still haven't got a chair, and B, that they're looking at former senior police officers, former senior social workers to investigate how police and social workers and councils covered up a grooming gang scandal?
Yeah, to a degree. However, when you consider that obviously the previous inquiries, what's been said is there have been widespread systemic failures, and you can virtually look at every part of society, whether that's councils, police forces, NHS, churches, schools, etc. So therefore, who are you going to put in place?
Well, a senior judge would be the first choice, surely.
Yeah, but we also know that if you go back, if you've worked in this area, that there's been people from the legal side have also been part of this.
Yeah.
This is the problem we've got, Julia, that in fact it's so widespread that you will have anybody from any walk of life, any profession, who has some stage been involved. So you could use this. Now, what Fiona Goddard did say was quite right. How can we trust these people? Personally, I happen to know Jim Gamble, and I would say, I mean, there's two people that worked in this area. One was the former head of the Scotland Yard one, Peter Spindler. Peter Spindler and Jim Gamble, they headed up some massive inquiries in this, and I personally would say, I would put my trust behind them. But it's going to be very hard for any victim to say, well, we can't have police doing this. We can't have. I get that. I understand that. But the problem is, at the end of the day, you're going to have to put somebody in charge.
Position. But it's amazing it's taking so long. I mean, it's interesting thinking back to the Grenfell inquiry, and so many of the sort of campaigners objected to. I think it was Justice Morbick Smith, I think his name was. Apologies for forgetting his name. But he was basically a posh white man. He couldn't possibly understand. They ended up loving this guy, and he absolutely, really, really did them proud. So it is a bit unfair, to tarnish everyone with the same brush. But you can understand their concerns about, well, if you do ask questions of those who are the candidates, these are the sort of questions we expect you to ask. I would have thought these women, they can sodding well decide what questions they want to ask. The whole point is that they're not coming at it from a sort of a professional perspective. They're coming at it from the perspective of those who've actually been abused.
Yeah, well, that's going to be my next point. I think if you speak to Fiona and Eliane, that the fact is that if you look at these inquiries and where you would start it as a former detective, you're going to speak to the victims.
Yep.
They're the ones that you're going to go directly to. Forget all the councils. Forget them. Let's speak to the victims. Let's get everything put in place. Exactly what happened, when exactly. I mean, Maggie will be, I think, be on later, and she'll say, you follow the evidence. We get the evidence from the victims, so deal with the victims first.
Yeah, and get their version. Well, the version of events which is going to be more likely to be the most accurate one. Well, Maggie Oliver, I mean, she's written a public letter, pointing out that, none of the victims and survivors that she pulled together to speak to Baroness Louise Casey when she did her sort of rapid review about whether or not there should be. It was basically the Prime Minister's get out card, like, oh, we're not having an inquiry. Oh, OK, we'll get Louise Casey to look at this, and she'll say we need to have one, and then we can change our mind and we've got cover for it. But Louise Casey's got a really, really strong track record of telling it like it is. And she met with these young women and she was very, very, very clear, absolutely, there had to be a full inquiry. But none of the women who met with Baroness Casey have been invited to have any role whatsoever.
Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it takes so much courage for these victims of horrendous abuse, for them to come forward and actually sort of not hide behind anything. They want to be heard. That's why you go and speak to them, because you get the evidence, but you also get the passion, the fact that they need to be looked after, they need to be heard, they need to be listened to. And I just don't understand it. I mean, no wonder Fiona and Eliana said, look, we've lost faith in this. Yeah. So I don't think it's just about who's going to chair it, like that poison chalice, who's going to sit there. This is all about actually, well, hang on a minute, listen to us, we are the victims.
And this is the thing, though, isn't it? Because a lot of people are worried about, that this is an attempt to sabotage this inquiry. The Prime Minister didn't want to have one. He was kind of pushed into it by the big furore that Elon Musk picked up on a report about what was going on in the grooming gangs inquiry cases. We know the victims have been crying out for years. And people say, oh, well, people didn't know. Yeah, they did. Everyone sodding well knew. They just didn't want to do anything about it. It was all too difficult because too many people at senior levels were involved in the cover-up. And we know why there was a cover-up. There was a cover-up because people, lots of people who wanted to be woke, wanted to be nice, were felt a bit uncomfortable about the fact that the men involved in this were predominantly Pakistani Muslim men, and they were targeting predominantly white girls because they saw them as trash. This came out in evidence in court that this was how they viewed these girls. They were easy prey, they had no value, and that's what happened. Now, we all know that it's a white majority country. The majority of paedophiles and sex abusers in this country will be white men. We know that. However, there wasn't a deliberate policy to not prosecute and to not stop those men doing that in the way that there was with the Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. And that is what the issue is. There was literally a decision made, by every level, loads of councils, loads of police forces, social care. Just keep it quiet. Community cohesion mattered more.
I totally agree.
So, is this why they want it to go away? Because, as Philip pointed out a little bit earlier, actually the majority of the places where this happened were Labour majority councils. They're up to their eyeballs in this, and everyone just wants it to go away.
Yeah, they're frightened of it. They're absolutely frightened of it, because who is it going to name? And it's going to be people, as we talked about right at the start, the systemic failures within councils, within police, within social services, all the people that should have been looking after these vulnerable children in society. And so, they're frightened of what's going to happen. And then you've got the councils, you've got the MPs as well. This is where a lot of votes will count. And it brings us up to date with where we're going with London. And, of course, there's grooming gangs in London.
What a mystery. The capital of this city, 10 million people, and there's no grooming gangs at all.
There were grooming gangs when I was still at Scotland Yard. We were dealing with it. We had undercover officers. So why Mark Rowley's sort of going, well, I'm not certain about this. But, well, of course there are. There have been for many, many years. For the last 35 years I've been working in this area. I've known about them. You might not be able to sort of say, right, it's all British Pakistani men. But certainly that, of course, that's happening in London.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Can you explain to me, as somebody who was a former detective, looking at child abuse investigations, and I've got a good friend who is a detective, and she is dealing with victims of grooming gangs and trying to get evidence to when they can one day persuade these 16, 15, 14-year-old girls that they are victims of abuse. And so, when they're older and they realise these men are not their boyfriends and don't love them, and that they can actually bring these cases. I mean, absolutely heartbreaking stuff. The mindset of a social worker, a care home worker, a health worker in an emergency ward when a girl comes in clearly pregnant when she's underage, or a police officer, a councilman, whoever it is, the huge range of people in authority who should have been people who could be trusted to act for these girls. What could possibly be going through their minds when they're thinking, yeah, I'll just keep quiet? Because I know the urge, like, oh, you know, people didn't want to be accused of being racist. I would take that risk to safeguard a 13-year-old girl from being gang raped.
Yeah, I think there's a mixture here. Certainly in my time and the teams that I work for, we didn't have this. I mean, Philip mentioned earlier that hopefully most police officers would be able to carry out their own inquiries, and that's exactly what we did. But if you now go to some smaller forces over the time, and I don't mean that in any detrimental effect, but if you've got smaller forces under pressure, and you're also going to have the political pressure coming in, because we didn't have that really in the Met. We were very autonomous in the sense that we could carry on their own inquiries.
Yeah.
So, but that's not that sounds like I'm giving an excuse. It's not. There's no way in a million years a police officer or detective or social worker, if they have a vulnerable child come into an inquiry, you listen to that child. Yes, you then look at the evidence. And I totally agree with what some people said in the past, that Crown Prosecution Service would have come in and said there's not enough evidence to charge. Okay, but at least you've done the investigation. That's what we're crying out for, and that's exactly what Fiona and Eliane say now. We want an investigation directly aimed with the victims. What are we going to investigate? Where are we going with this?
Yeah.
So what goes through someone's mind? If there's pressure coming from above, I'm sorry, I would have acted. I would have said something. So it's a shame that hasn't happened in the past, but it could easily be that there was that pressure in some of the smaller forces. Now, GMP is not a small force, but of course, a lot of the little areas within it might be that's where the pressure was.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, you're just that sort of your career's going to be over, and you know people, and then you see people like Maggie Oliver leave because to speak out. Can I also ask you about Virginia Giuffre, because sadly, you know, took her own life earlier this year, as often happens sadly to victims of this kind of abuse. But her book is now out, Nobody's Child, and basically, you know, Nobody's Girl, so talking about, you know, her experiences. Now, of course, Prince Andrew's always denied any wrongdoing. He's not been accused of any crimes in this country. But we certainly know that, given the millions that have been paid out by Jeffrey Epstein and his estate, that certainly, I mean, hundreds of women, possibly even thousands, were victims of his abuse. We had a caller yesterday, and it's really troubled me, actually, because she was saying, I mean, just look, you know, this woman, she would have known to walk away. She knew what was going was wrong. She didn't walk away, and these other women would have known it was wrong. Same with these girls, you know, 13, 14-year-old girls in Rochdale or Rotherham or wherever. They must have known that being handed round, you know, 14, you know, four men as old enough to be their fathers or grandfathers, and being, you know, anally raped was not normal. But they didn't walk away. Tell us why young girls, young women, young boys who are victims of this, why they don't.
Well, they're getting brought into it, and this, I mean, obviously we know from Nobody's Girl and her memoirs that she was, unfortunately, a victim of sexual abuse from a very young age.
Yeah.
But of course, the reason they're getting brought into this because they're groomed, and the grooming process is one, when it first starts, that most victims will enjoy. You're talking about gifts, you're talking about compliments, you're talking about love. Then they suddenly realise that actually this isn't the case, and what we know from the memoirs is that there were a lot of threats to her family, that we know where your brother goes to school. Yeah. So now there's all this guilt trip. If you don't do this, we're going to, no one's going to believe you anyway. Yeah. Power struggle. And that's what the interesting thing is. You'll always hear from people like myself and Maggie, etc. It's about power. Yes, it's about sex and sexual exploitation, but it's about power. Yeah. And when that power is wielded like it is here, by these very powerful individuals, you're talking celebrities, you're talking
billionaire.
Yeah. Exactly. The money's going in there where they can't walk away. This is the problem. And it takes somebody very brave, like Virginia, like Fiona, like Eliane, to say, right, I'm going to get out of this, and I am going to say it, and I'm going to speak up about this. Absolutely. This takes bravery, but it's not as easy as what people think.
Absolutely. Good news yesterday that Graham Linehan, the comedy writer, was not going to face any further action for 3 tweets that he posted about trans activism, which were quite blatantly not illegal, quite blatantly not a crime, should never have been arrested, certainly not by armed officers at Heathrow as he got off a plane to attend another court hearing about something else entirely. But the outcry over this, particularly I think in America, seems to have created a moment where we've had a little bit of the madness has broken briefly into a moment of sanity from the Metropolitan Police. What's your reaction to their statement that they are no longer going to investigate, or they will continue to record such incidents?
Well, it's fantastic news, obviously. We were slightly astonished yesterday. The Free Speech Union had paid for Graham's legal defence team found the lawyers, and we'd already succeeded in getting some of the absurdly onerous bail conditions imposed on Graham when he was released, but still under investigation following his arrest.
What were those conditions?
One was that he wasn't able to comment on the case. It was a gagging order. We got that lifted pretty quickly. But there was another, which was that he wasn't allowed to contact any of the quote-unquote victims. But, of course, there weren't any victims because he didn't name anyone in the 3 tweets he was under investigation for. They were just generally satirical, Mickey-taking tweets about trans rights activists. So that was pretty absurd. We managed to get that lifted. And then the Metropolitan Police announced that they were going to take no further action against him, i.e. they were dropping all charges. So that was fantastic news. Champagne corks already beginning to pop, but Free Speech Union headquarters. And then came the additional bonus, which we weren't expecting, that the Metropolitan Police have decided to no longer investigate reports of non-crime hate incidents. So that was fantastic news. And because the Met is the largest police force in the country, and because Sir Mark Rowley is one of the more influential leaders of the police, we hope that other police forces will now follow suit. And this could be the beginning of the end of NCHI, something the Free Speech Union and others have been campaigning against for over 5 years.
You and many of us campaigning against them, but I mean, even a former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, basically told the police some years back when she was in office, stop investigating non-crime hate incidents. There's a clue in the name. They're not crimes. They're not any of your sodding business or the police. We've got quite a lot of crimes that we'd like investigated: shoplifting, phone thefts, bike thefts, got burglary, rapes, murders. I mean, those perhaps take priority. And when you've solved all of those, even then, don't spend your time on non-crime hate incidents. They've carried on anyway. And the thing is, we only hear about a few high-profile cases, don't we? You know, Graham Linehan, well-known, much-loved comedy writer. It went viral on the internet, on front pages. But actually, this is happening on a huge scale. Give us an idea of just quite how many times this is happening and who it's happening to.
Well, there was a report in the Times earlier this year based on Freedom of Information requests submitted to every police force in the country, which revealed that over 12,000 people a year are being arrested by the police and investigated for committing just 2 possible speech offences online. I think it was the Malicious Communications Act and Section 127 of the Communications Act, and those 2 are only 2 of about a dozen speech offences you can be arrested for. But over 12,000 a year works out at over 30 a day. Yeah. So the scale of this is really quite staggering. I mean, it's far, far larger than any other country.
And it's not often people, well-known, famous names. It's ordinary people posting this. And I know that an awful lot of these do involve women and other people, who would be men, speaking out about trans activism. And a lot of this, these are being used as political tools in a bid to silence people because, well, you might not face criminal charges at the end, including Graham Linehan in this case, but what everyone always says, the process is the punishment.
Yeah. If you look back over the Free Speech Union's cases, we've fought now over 4,500 cases over the last 5.5+ years, and about 40% of them, 40% are women who've got into trouble because they've said they don't want to share lavatories with biological men or don't think women should have to compete against biological men in women's sports.
Terrible bigots. What terrible, awful things for them to say. So basically, what would have been completely normal conversation and a view, 10 years ago, they're being investigated by the police. And again, police who should have better things to do. Do you think things change now? Because we know there are a lot of people who don't even know that they've got a non-crime hate incident even registered against them. They go to get a job as a teacher, a social worker, go to work with children, and then they find out that during the enhanced record checks, this flags up that they've got this hate incident recorded against them. Sometimes they don't even know about it.
Yeah, that is the really pernicious thing about NCHIs. I mean, the waste of police time is obviously a hugely important objection to them. The Policy Exchange published a report last November in which it revealed that the police are spending, in England and Wales alone, 60,000 hours a year investigating NCHI. So in the last 11 years, they were introduced in 2014. That's 660,000 police hours, when, as you say, I think in the last 3 years, in 48 of the postcodes in England and Wales, not a single burglary was solved in the last 3 years. But the really pernicious thing about them is that they can show up. If you apply for a job as a teacher or a carer and you're required to do an enhanced DBS check, they can be disclosed as something on your criminal record, even though it's a non-crime hate incident, and stop you getting a job. And that's a breach of a fundamental principle of English common law and a bulwark of British liberty, which is that unless something is explicitly prohibited, then it's permitted. By definition, non-crime isn't explicitly prohibited, it's non-criminal.
They said the quiet bit out loud. But this is it. I mean, this comes into, the Online Safety Act, which is still a big issue. And, we get, the will there, won't there be a new definition of whatever Islamophobia is? And this is all about our speech being controlled, people being fearful of saying things they know or believe to be true, and then the police getting involved based on someone else's subjective view. And again, with a non-crime hate instance, the police have been asked to investigate whether or not there is a victim, whether or not the person who complains about it witnessed it, saw it, or had anything to do with it, was the subject of it. I mean, and just someone saying, but I thought it was a hate incident, that in itself can be recorded as a hate incident. That goes against every principle of justice.
Well, that's absolutely right. When Suella Braverman introduced her statutory amendment in 2023, she introduced that introduced a new code of practice that the police are expected to follow when it comes to the recording, which incidents to record at NCHIs. There is now a reasonableness standard, but it doesn't seem to have stopped the promiscuous recording of NCHIs. Actually, they've increased since 2023. So that's one of the reasons I welcome Mark Rowley's announcement that the Met are no longer going to be investigating them. But as you say, that's only part of the battle. The next thing we have to make sure happens is that NCHIs are non-disclosable in enhanced DBS checks, so they don't stop you from getting a job where an enhanced DBS check is required. I described this yesterday to the Free Speech Union staff as El Alamein, but not D-Day. We've still got quite a few battles to fight.
Absolutely. One battle that does appear to be over is at the Oxford Union. This, of course, is part of the, it's part of Oxford University, but not actually part of the university body. And it's the Oxford Union Society. And there's been a big row ever since the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk in the States, which was greeted by the president-elect of the Oxford Union, George Baronier, as a source of joy and amusement. And even though he debated this man one-on-one, face-to-face, some months earlier, he was taking pleasure in the murder of a young husband and father. I have to say, it was quite horrific. And I said at the time, I thought he was an appalling human being. He faced a vote of no confidence ahead of him even taking office next term. And we had a load of people voting. There was a big organisation of current members who were past members of the university being able to vote. There was a whole load of shenanigans going on over that vote, and accusations there'd been intimidation by people supporting this young man. But it's been announced this morning that the President-elect, George Baronier, has been ousted following outrage of his celebration of Charlie Kirk's shooting. You're a free speech campaigner, but part of free speech is, I suppose, being able to have a debate without wishing your opponent dead. Do you think it's right that he's been ousted?
I feel conflicted about this one, Julia. At the Free Speech Union, we quite often find ourselves defending people who've said something in a private WhatsApp chat, which is where the now ousted president-elect made his inflammatory, deeply unpleasant comment.
It wasn't very private. It was with a lot of other people.
It wasn't very private. But we quite often find ourselves defending people on the other side of the culture war to this chap, but who've got into trouble for something they've said in a private WhatsApp group that's supposedly brought their employer into disrepute. And it's quite a nebulous quite broad standard. Our general position is that social media policies should not be designed so broadly that they can be weaponized to get rid of people whose political opinions you disagree with, and they quite often are. We think that, well, first of all, there should be a statute of limitations on how far back the offence archaeologists can go to dig up stuff.
You've been a victim of that yourself.
I've been a victim of that myself. But we also think that unless the institution can show tangible harm, that its reputation has actually been tangibly harmed in a provable way, then people should not be losing their jobs, not placed under investigation by university authorities for things they've said in chat groups, often late at night and, when they've had a few wines. And he's quite young. I mean, I would have preferred it, I think, if he had resigned. Had he made a really fulsome apology, I think he'd be in a much stronger position now. His apology was a little bit mealy-mouthed.
Well, no, I mean, let's face it, he defended what he had said. My view was we're allowed to judge him for the rest of our lives and rest of his. Can I ask you about one other thing? Because you were a massive campaigner against lockdowns during COVID. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is the latest senior figure to give evidence to the COVID inquiry, and this is the period when they're looking particularly at what happened to schools, what happened to children. He's being asked to react to what the former Education Secretary Gavin Williamson gave in his testimony last week to the inquiry. Basically said, look, there'll be no planning for schools to be closed. And again, I'm sure you and I both remember Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance telling us and showing us graphs about why there was no point closing schools during lockdown, during COVID, because it wasn't going to make much difference to closure, to the spread, sorry. But Boris Johnson tells the inquiry that it's clear the idea of closures was being discussed and planned for by SAGE, by the Cabinet, and he absolutely says there was planning for mass school closures and is clearly defending it. What's your response to that?
I think the closure of schools during the lockdown is absolutely indefensible. I tabled an amendment along with Graham Brady in the House of Lords last month to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill to make it virtually impossible for schools to be closed in the event of something else like this happening. I think it was partly planned for, it was partly pressure being brought to bear on Boris and the Education Secretary by SAGE and by the government scientific advisors.
And the trade unions.
It was also, as you say, the teaching unions.
And by the way, lots of the media. I mean, I remember I assumed when I supported the first lockdown, which you always railed against, that they had new evidence. They didn't have new evidence, but I always opposed school closures. And we know from Sweden, don't we? Not a single child under the age of 16 missed a day of school. They have lower COVID and other deaths than us. Haven't got a wrecked economy and haven't got a wrecked health service.
There is literally zero evidence that closing schools in any way curbed the spread of infection of COVID-19. Julia, you may not know, but the Norwegian Prime Minister in 2020, shortly after closing schools, reopened them again and apologised to children and parents for having made such a colossal, catastrophic mistake. That's what I'd like to hear Boris say to the COVID inquiry.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's start with the grooming gangs inquiry. Three of the survivors, the victims, I understand why they want to be called survivors, but have resigned. Two have gone public, Fiona Goddard and Ellie Ann Reynolds, a herdswoman known only as Elizabeth, because of anonymity rules, she doesn't have to give her full name, and she's quite right within her rights to do so. They basically said, look, that this isn't working. It's a cover-up. It's a toxic environment. They're trying to downplay this. They're trying to widen it out. So it's about all group gang, a gang rape, as opposed to these particular modus operandi, which even the government's appointed, Baroness Louise Casey to do that rapid review earlier in the year, which basically went, there needs to be a full public inquiry, and even she made it really clear that predominantly this is carried out by Muslim Pakistani men, and there is a reason behind not just their choice of their victims, but crucially the fact that they were not challenged for 20 years pretty much was because of their ethnicity and their religion, and the urge of the police, the social care workers, the councils and everything to basically brush it under the carpet because it was all a bit awkward. What with community cohesion and being accused of being a racist or an Islamophobe? That is why that aspect is vital to include, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be front and centre of any inquiry. And I think Louise Casey made that abundantly clear. It was clear in her first review, which was lengthy. The quick down and dirty review that she did pointed it out in even more technicolor detail, that said these are the people you need to be looking at, this is what you need to focus on. So why the government feels in its wisdom that it can go and push that to one side is beyond me.
What do you make of the Home Office Minister Jess Phillips? Because to her credit, as a backbench Labour MP, I mean, let's face it, Jess Phillips is the Minister for Jess Phillips. She's the MP for Jess Phillips. It's all about Jess Phillips.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. But she has done some great work, you know, campaigning against violence against women and girls. And she really has. And it's been a really, really big part of her political career. And I think, you know, we should give credit to that. She's then put in the job where she's a safeguarding minister. So, you know, yeah, great. You know, this is your area of expertise. It's your area of passion, you know. Yeah. And she basically has completely and utterly lost the trust of the very people she claims to care the most about. But I do want to... Do you just care about the victims of other perpetrators? And when these white working class girls from all towns across the country, when they say, but I was targeted because I was white by men who were of Pakistani Muslim heritage, who targeted me for that very reason and who were never arrested and charged, even when there was blatant evidence, absolutely blatant evidence that they were committing a gang rape against underage girls. And it was because of their ethnicity and because of their religion that they were not brought to justice. It's all a bit awkward because it doesn't tally with her PC woke views on Muslim. No, this is it. Muslims are victims, right? Rape victims are victims. But when you've got, I mean, it's almost like she can't compute. I find it really simple to understand that men of all colours and religions can rape, and women of all colours and religions or none can be victims of rape. Yeah. I don't find that complicated at all. But we know for a fact that the religion and the ethnicity of these perpetrators of these grooming gangs is relevant because it's the reason why they were allowed to continue.
That's right. I listened to the urgent question that was in the House of Commons yesterday, where Jess Phillips was there to defend the government's stance. She started off quite well. I have to say it went downhill rapidly.
Do you think so? When she reads the statement, she always sounds like I'm a little bit bored and I've got somewhere better to be and I'm Jess Phillips and I'm morally superior to you?
She didn't come across like that to begin with.
I had a different statement.
To begin with, it sounded pretty normal. Pretty good statement, fine. She didn't write it, that was obvious. And then as soon as the questioning came, she got defensive.
Narky.
Sloppy. Yeah, narky. She looked like she would rather be anywhere else. And it did at one point say, I could be speaking to some victims right now, but I'm here with you. And it's like, but this is your job, love. This is your job, and this is really important.
But for me, her whole tone was, how dare you question me?
Yeah. The minute she stepped off script, she then became really narky, really, I would prefer to be anywhere else and don't question me.
And it's perfectly fair, criticise the Tories. You were in power, you didn't do a proper inquiry in this either.
Precisely.
You knew all about it.
We should have done. We absolutely should have done. And that's on us. But now the Labour government...
You were in the Home Office. Was this ever raised when you were there?
Not when I was there. Not when I was there. I dealt
it's all
with...
been covered up.
Yeah, and I dealt with other immigration cases, and because these weren't strictly immigration cases... It wasn't
your field.
It wasn't in my view, so sadly. Otherwise, I think probably would have pushed for it then.
What do you make of... I mean, we've got a potential chair who has pulled out as well. One of the people being looked at, a senior social worker, Annie Hudson. She's been shortlisted to chair the three-year inquiry. I mean, these things always take longer. Another shortlisted name is Jim Gamble, who's a former senior police officer. Now, again, I completely understand why the victims are saying, hold on a minute, you know, even when we had juries deciding in the case of our perpetrators who were convicted, the judge didn't allow anyone on the jury who was a social worker or a teacher or a police officer or had links to them because those are the very organisations that perpetrated the cover-up, so they can't be trusted. So I can understand you say, well, I don't want a senior social worker. I don't want a senior former police officer. Jim Gamble, we were discussing on the show yesterday, he's been a magnificent campaigner about child sex abuse, running CEOPS, although he's ex-cop. But I would trust him. I would 100% trust that man. But I can understand why the victims wouldn't.
Yeah. And same here. Why would you believe that somebody involved in police...
Any organisation.
Any organisation that is being looked at, why would you trust them to be able to go and basically mark their own homework, which is how people are looking at it. But then the question comes, who would you trust to lead up an
a senior
inquiry?
judge. It's normally a senior judge. What you want is a senior judge, because they've got you've already got your peerage or your OBE or whatever it is you want. So you're not looking after anything else, and you need someone who's got a really strong track record of, sending these men to jail, as opposed to going, oh, well, it might be a cultural difference, because we've seen enough of those judges. It just seems to me that's untenable. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. Who could run this inquiry? What does it tell you that 4 months in they haven't got a chair yet? What does it tell you that 3 sex abuse victims, we're told the 4th as well, but they've not gone public yet, have now resigned? We spoke to Maggie Oliver yesterday, who's the whistleblower of Rochdale, just a wonderful woman who's put her money on the line, to put a career, a job, a reputation on the line for these young women, and she says there's more to come. There's way more to come. There is clearly an attempt to cover up. This is Labour basically trying to, well, God, we've been forced to do this sodding inquiry. We know it's going to make a hell of a lot of problems for us ahead of the next election, with loads of Labour councillors being involved in all of this. We're in a heap load of trouble, and let's just try and make it go away. Well, good luck with that. I mean, I just don't think, good luck with that. It's not going to work, is it? Another thing that won't go away is sodding Prince Andrew. He won't go away. The stories won't go away. Taking away his HRH and then his Duke of York title and all of that utter, abject nonsense that I've got no time for anyway, as you all well know. It's a regular audience. Now they want to take away the Prince title. Again, I don't care. He was the son of the Queen. If you believe it, you either believe in titles or you don't. I don't believe in any titles, right? I don't even believe in the sirs and the lords. I'll play along because people seem to care about it when you speak to them as guests, but they all know personally that I don't approve of these things. No one's above me, no one's below me, end of. But, if you're going to believe in them, well, you can't take it away. If you believe in a hereditary monarchy, he's a prince and he stays a prince no matter what he's allowed to put on his headed notepaper. I don't really care what he calls himself. I do care when he was representing our country as an international trade envoy, and when he does a lot of things like his pitch at the palace, and there seems to be some financial benefit for him coming out of these things. I do care that he was put on a security list because he had far too many meetings with a man known to be a Chinese spy. And I do care when he's got a grace and favour, huge big house, 30 bedrooms or something?
It's enormous.
How many friends have you got coming to stay? I mean, do you want that many people to come and stay at your home? It's big grace and favour mansion, Royal Lodge. It's a mansion, okay? He's not only is he not paying any rent on it, he paid for the upkeep, £1 million lease initially, but he's got it until, the whole family's got it until 2078. I mean, good luck surviving that long. But paying a peppercorn rent, so 0 rent. Apparently he pays his water rates only when he feels like it, according to The Sun today. That's funny. I thought I had to pay my utilities. Does he pay his gas bill? Does he pay his electricity bill? I mean, I would like to know, because is it all optional? And this is the thing, and Margaret Hodge, she's the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and she's made some really good points today about, at the end of the day, they can't be both private and funded publicly. It's like with Prince Harry, isn't it? It's like you can't be a royal and also then go make money off Netflix. That's not how it works. So he's a public figure. He's been funded basically by his mum, late Queen. Basically indulged her favourite son, and he's got away with stuff for years, and probably she wasn't told the full story on things. At least I hope she wasn't, because otherwise, frankly, really unacceptable, very poor judgment on her part, and I would be surprised by that, because she is a woman who exercised superb judgment as a monarch in terms of, we never knew her political views, we never, she did her job, right. You're going to have a monarchy, that's as good as it gets, folks, But it's untenable for these people to they don't pay income tax, don't pay inheritance tax. Well, we have all this fuss about inheritance tax. Well, they don't pay any of the same taxes we pay.
They understand nothing about life. Absolutely nothing. And what I would like to see is him taken out of Royal Lodge. Go find yourself a 2-bedroom flat to rent. Learn how
Fergie's in one, he's in the other.
Exactly, but learn how to pay council tax, learn how to go shopping. Do all of those things, because he has not got a clue. But where his money comes from... It's not his fault
he was born into that world.
No, it's not, but he is now not in that world through his own actions. So why should he be allowed to
Never been even charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one.
No, and it's amazing, isn't it? He managed to get his mother to pay off a large sum of money to somebody for something he didn't do.
Or somebody he never even met. I mean, that's the thing. Look, everyone knows what they think about Prince Andrew. It's very, very, very clear. But seriously, there's a lot of questions about where does his money come from?
Yeah, and I think that's what we need to understand.
Never met a dodgy billionaire he doesn't like. I mean, again, this is my thing. Where is that money coming from? He got money from his mum.
Yep.
He got money from working as a trader boy, and lots of expense. Where is the rest of the money coming from? And he paid back $7 million for works. I mean, that's how big the house is. Imagine if refurbing your home. I think we made a lot less than that for our conservatory. And I've got to be honest with you, I had a new kitchen put in. I don't think it cost $7 million. So this is a big house. Where's he got that $7 million from? What about that? Didn't they have a £10 million ski lodge in Switzerland?
Yeah.
Well, where'd you get the money for that? There's no trail of. And then he had that, South Fork Ranch, the big house he owned with Fergie.
Sunninghill,
and some foreign billionaire bought it like a sort of double the market cost of homes in that area. I'm so sorry, but I don't think this story goes away until we see his finances. We're not going to see his finances, but things are going to come out of the woodwork.
And so it should. And so it should, because if taxpayers' money is flowing one way, which is into the royal family, and we all put money into that, then I think we do have an absolute right to know where the rest of that money is coming from. If he's being bolstered up by our cash, we need to know.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to pay a single penny.
No.
People, we've got an established, constitutional monarchy. That is the democratic preference of the people in this country. That's what we pay for. That's, that's fine. I've got no issue with that. But yeah, if he's not on the payroll. And he was a hero in the Falklands War. But what have you been doing since that you got that money? I'm just saying that is a man who must have bought a lot of Bitcoin.
You think
I mean, even a few good investments on on the stock market won't have paid. Did he buy shares in Apple in whatever it was, the day after it was launched, or did he buy a whole load of Bitcoin 15 years ago? Because there's no other explanation for his finances. I'm just saying. Let's also talk about the latest budget revelation. I mean, you never know if they're just flying a kite or if they're actually doing it. But this is around the time, as you'll know, having worked in government, that the Chancellor, although we only hear the budget on November the 26th, this is around the time when it's near to the point it's going to have to be sent to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent OBR. Where they basically say whether the numbers add up or not.
Yes.
But we're approaching that time, so they've got to download it. Well, the Times claims that Rachel Reeves is going to launch a £2 billion tax rate on limited liability partnerships. Now, what are those? Well, they are basically a partnership. Apparently more than 190,000 workers do use this. They're used by lawyers, by family doctors, by accountants, and basically there's a tax benefit over an ordinary employment because you're not subjected to employers' national insurance because you're treated as self-employed. Reeves reckons this is unfair. Again, this is the same as the IR35 issue for self-employed people, which is millions. I think about 3.5 million self-employed people. When people who are on PAYE say this to me, and I spent years as someone who was freelance with the private limited company, a personal service company, or whatever it's called. And they say, "Oh, it's not fair. I have to pay national insurance." Like, and do you enjoy your paid sick leave, your paid holiday, your pension contributions, and all of the other rights that you have as a member of staff? Well done for you, because IR35, outside IR35, you don't get that. And this thing, you don't get. These people don't get paid holiday. National insurance, if you work it out from your employer, basically pays for your paid holiday.
Yes.
That's basically covers that percentage.
People don't realise. And people don't realise, and the taxation system in this country is incredibly complicated. But I think that when you start looking at these schemes, Rachel Reeves appears to just be looking at which professions can I hit next.
Are we going to be very sympathetic to lawyers, accountants, and even GPs now?
Well, I think we
know they're paid highly. They're not people. Most of the times you're dealing with these people when you don't want to be. Well, you don't want to go to the doctor. You don't want to see a lawyer. You don't want to see your accountant, do you?
No, right up until the moment that you do need one, and you want them to be good. And so you think if you start to scare those away, are we going to run out of lawyers and GPs?
The thing is, the £2 billion quid it's going to raise, realistically,
but that's like a drop in the ocean, though, isn't
compared
it?
to where we are.
We need.
Absolutely. Let's talk about where we are internationally, because we did have this planned meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. This suddenly came about in Hungary just after Donald Trump talked about giving long-range missiles to Zelensky in Ukraine. Suddenly he's got taken that off the table. Now Putin's a bit too busy, doesn't want to attend this meeting, and a lot of it is down to the fact that, well, basically he's not feeling under threat. And it turns out he doesn't want to have the meeting. There's no point in having the meeting because he's not willing to accept the basic terms, which would be a freezing of the front line in Ukraine as it is. He wants to have more of Donbass than he's even been able to conquer so far. I mean, Donald Trump is being treated like a fool by this guy. I don't know why. I don't know why he understands that Hamas are a threat and Iran is a threat. China is a threat. But no, Vladimir Putin, not an issue.
And you do wonder, the summit they had in Anchorage, Alaska, what did they actually discuss? Because seemingly there are two different sides to this. So Donald Trump believes that he had an agreement with Vladimir Putin, that it was going to be frozen on those boundaries and nothing more. And then Putin's gone, well, doing that whole toddler thing, going, but what about this?
Yeah.
And I want this bit, and this bit, and this bit. And he's going to keep doing it. And is it a surprise to us? No, not in the slightest. It appears to be to Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, he's just being played by this guy. But every phone call he gets with Vladimir Putin, we move backwards on this issue. I mean, what do you reckon of British troops being deployed to Israel to monitor the Gaza ceasefire after a request from the US? We're talking about a handful of troops, but
anything I think that we can do to assist Israel is good.
But not entering the war zone.
Not entering the war zone.
It is still a war zone.
It is still a war zone. This is a very fragile time, and I think if we can just show support and show a little bit of solidarity, then that's a good thing. I think if we step over any more than that, it is different territory, and it all kicks off again.
Greg Swenson joins us now. He's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Good afternoon to you, Greg.
Hello, Julia. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And I want to talk to you about, again, a war started by Vladimir Putin of Russia, invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. War that's still ongoing, a war of attrition, huge number of casualties, huge number of wounded men, huge number of killed men, and indeed many, many civilians as well in Ukraine being killed, and also tens of thousands of children abducted by Russia. It's a horrific, horrific war. Donald Trump has always said he wanted to end it. He said he'd do it on day one when he became president. Well, didn't work out quite so easily. But we've had lots of developments in the last few weeks. I think there was talk about sending, long-range missiles, Tomahawk missiles, to the Ukrainians to help them defeat Russia. Been talk about him having big rows with Zelensky in the White House and insisting he basically has to concede even more territory than Russia's already got in return for a ceasefire deal. A phone call with Vladimir Putin, and then yesterday we got the announcement of some pretty serious new sanctions on the Russians' energy sector, which Donald Trump says could actually really hit Putin's ability to fund his war. Really simple question, Greg. What the hell is going on in the White House?
Well, I think that, the president is an anti-war president. He's very much a peace president. So he will use every diplomatic or economic tool first before he will either allow Tomahawk missiles or sell Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or, escalate this war. And so, first he tried diplomacy, didn't work. That's not on him. That's on Putin. And then, of course, you've had economic sanctions in the past with Russia, but they were pretty toothless during the Biden years and didn't work. I mean, the Russian economy is in trouble, but not severe trouble. They're still growing and they still have money, although he's depleted the sovereign wealth fund from 130 bill to down to 31 billion or something like that, 117 to down to 31. So, there's some challenges for Putin, but this is something that's much more serious. You saw, oil's up $5 a barrel, probably, I think it's roughly 6%. That is significant. It's like basically half of the oil that's sold by Russia every day comes through two companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, and it looks like that's by sanctioning those two companies, it takes 2 million barrels a day off the market. Now, India is a big part of that. They're not buying quite as much as China. They're buying 1.6 million barrels a day versus China at 2 million. But I think that's still significant. And with China cooperating here, India cooperating, I think these sanctions will have some legs.
Well, this is the thing. I've always been of view. We know China's an enemy state. even if our government doesn't apparently realise it. But I've always found it extraordinary that India just playing along. There we are. We'll buy the oil. Are you whose side are you on? Pick a side would have been my response as a US president and indeed European leaders. But we've also had European countries who've been happily buying the oil. So they're contributing weaponry and money to buy weaponry to send to Ukraine and talking the talk and hugging President Zelensky and saying, isn't it all terrible, condemning Vladimir Putin, and at the same time buying his oil, funding the war against the Ukrainians.
Yeah, they're funding both sides. So they bought $22 billion worth of oil last year, most of it in the form of refined products from India.
But they know where it comes from.
Yes, India buys the cheap Russian oil, they process it or refine it and send it on. And so, the 22 billion was actually higher than the contributions to Ukraine last year. And so I think that's one thing that was really annoying the president. And the president was very vocal about that. He slapped 50% tariffs on India a few months back, and everybody was whining about, his disruptive nature, and he was getting into a spat with an ally. Well, there were some pretty good reasons for that, and look what happened. Modi came around yesterday. They had a phone call, and Modi's on board.
That's the thing, and that was the only thing that was going to work, wasn't it? But this is the thing. What a lot of people don't understand is look, people can have their views on where they are in Israel and Gaza. I'm sorry, it seems to me to be as black and white as Ukraine is, and it absolutely stuns me that anyone doesn't get it. In Israel, there is one victim and one perpetrator. Ukraine and Russia, there is one victim, one perpetrator, and yet your president has again and again and again seemed to say he said, she said, and Vladimir Putin, we have to help him. He's even, happy, roll out the red carpet for him, giving him a lift in the Beast, his big armor-driven limo when they met in Alaska. A huge victory on the propaganda front for Vladimir Putin when this man has invaded a sovereign democratic nation state.
I see that you're playing the clip, or the producer's playing the clip from Alaska, and look, but as I said, the President Trump is he's a peace president.
I think that's a load of nonsense. We're all in favour of peace. Sometimes, if he wanted peace, he could arm the Ukrainians to the hilt, and then they could end the war by defeating Russia. That's how you get peace.
I'm not sure that they could defeat Russia, even with all the arms in the world. And so this is a stalemate, and everybody knows it. Mark Milley told Biden this 2 years ago. Zelensky's chief of staff or military chief of staff also told Zelensky that. So Zelensky fired him. Biden ignored Mark Milley. And here we are 2 years later with a lot more body bags. So, look, I think the president, as I said, likes to run with diplomacy first. He tried that. It didn't work, okay? Guilty as charged. Now he's using economic leverage. He's using a little bit more aggression. He's teased with the idea of Tomahawk missiles. That opens up a couple of other issues that are complicated.
And when he did tease it, then Vladimir Putin was willing to meet with him in Hungary. And when he took it off the table, suddenly that meeting disappeared. That tells you everything.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's why he's going with the economic sanctions. He still can tease the Tomahawks out there. Look, there is some, as I mentioned, there's complications there. Those Tomahawks are always fired from U.S. naval submarines and surface ships.
Okay.
They can't be fired from U.S. subs and ships. They have to be fired on the ground in Ukraine. That's going to require American help and American intelligence. That brings America more directly into the war. So, then we've got a nuclear power fighting each other, and that's not pleasant.
Yeah, I think we are already at war with Russia, and everyone needs to get with the programme personally. But I understand those concerns, absolutely. Greg Spencer, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, so appreciate you joining us for that. And we didn't get to talk about the new ballroom at the White House, which apparently is the only thing that Donald Trump actually cares about, knocking down the East Wing. It's quite bizarre. But Benedict, come back in on this issue. Not the ballroom.
Not the ballroom. I was just cock my head there and go, oh, really? That's unexpected. But no, the thing is, I'm afraid to say, and you know that I feel very strongly about the issue of Ukraine and self-determination. The problem is we are so deep now into the conflict, and Ukraine has lost so much in terms of its manpower, that the assessment that it can defeat the Russians if you just give it the weapons, I don't think that bears out anymore. I think ultimately, you said it yourself, you think that the West is effectively at war with Russia. Yes, I'd agree with that. And I think a lot of Western nations have to hang their heads in shame that they didn't wake up to that early enough. They didn't arm the Ukrainians early enough. Yeah. And when they did, they put all kinds of constraints saying, well, you can't use this here and you can't use this there. That was the thing that did for the Ukrainians. They did a fantastic job, actually, of stymieing the Russian invasion. There was a window in which they could have pushed them back to the point where maybe Russia would have been forced to come to the negotiating table. I'm afraid to say I think that window has long since gone. ultimately, and that is the fault of Ukraine's allies, not Ukraine itself.
Okay. The naming, finally, of the 15-year-old boy who killed his fellow schoolboy and his friend. They were best friends, by all accounts, Harvey Wilgoose. And I think we were all absolutely horrified back in February when Harvey was stabbed to death, stabbed through his heart in front of other pupils during his lunch break at All Saints Catholic High School in Sheffield. Just, I mean, horrific. I think every parent, I mean, the thought your kid going to school and just never coming home is so beyond your wildest nightmares. But Mohammed Umar Khan has been named. He's been sentenced to at least 16 years behind bars by the judge. Turns out the two boys, they'd been friends, but they'd fallen out on social media. There we go, social media again. Now, he was convicted of murder back in August when he failed to persuade a jury that it was manslaughter. Basically, he was being bullied, and he said he'd lost control. But the judge yesterday lifted a reporting restriction while she sentenced him. But he was basically obsessed with knives. He was in the same year, you know. He joined All Saints after leaving his previous school because of bullying, but he'd been targeted by other pupils as well. And so, okay, something's going on, but he had a difficult home life. His mother had mental health issues. His father was often in Pakistan, absent from the family home. That he was beaten at home. Social services had been involved in the family. There were reports that he and his kid's brother and sister were not being fed properly. They were malnourished. But the social service did no further action, even though the kids apparently were skinny, malnourished, didn't own pyjamas and had no sheets on their beds. There's a bit of a giveaway. Something's not going right at home. They assessed that he had been beaten, clearly. But also, his mother had actually reported at one point that he had a knife. She herself reported, and he had this absolutely huge knife. He hadn't taken a knife from the mum's drawer.
No,
he had this massive, huge hunting knife. He was a kid. And he stabbed another kid through the heart and killed him. And yet again, and we're back to Axel Ruder Cabana, aren't we, in the Southport attack?
Yeah.
You know, there's this kid, the red neon signs are flashing that he is in trouble himself.
Yeah.
He's things are going horribly wrong at home. He is a danger to possibly himself and to others, and nothing is done.
Yeah.
A kid is dead.
This is not to excuse, but this is the warning. No, this is the warning sign. Young adolescent boys can become very interested in things like gang culture and violence, and obviously we all know when they're at that age there's the fluctuating hormones, there can be acts of aggression, there can be fallings out, that sort of thing. The way that we're treating this...
Boys used to just punch each other.
Exactly. The way that we're treating this is not in line at all with the progress that has been made in terms of what it is that these boys are being exposed to. They didn't used to get exposed when it was, the worry about video games and rap music. Okay, that wasn't great, but let's be clear, it was not the things that they are able to access online. When they had phones when I was young, you were able to text, you were able to call, maybe you'd play some tinny music. Now you can access absolutely everything, the entirety of the internet, and I'm sorry, the Online Safety Act does not prevent people from doing it, especially tech-savvy children, far more tech-savvy than the adults. They can access this stuff, and gang culture in particular, and the fixation around knives is pushed onto them because it is seen as cool. It is a way of belonging. It is a way of giving them that sort of esteem, and it is dangerous. It didn't used to exist in this country. It's certainly not on anything like the scale that it currently does, and it wasn't being beamed into their eyeballs 24/7.
And so many parents are just like, well, my kid's not seeing it. Yes, your kid is seeing horrific, violent porn. Your kid is seeing violent killings, gruesome, horrible stuff. And if you think your kid isn't seeing it, you are living in cloud cuckoo land.
And this is the other thing. We're talking here about knives, we're talking about gangs, as you just said there, violent pornography, but it's also self-harm. It is people promoting eating disorders, and it is, of course, the trans thing. All of this is stuff, happening. And trust me, it is your kids seeing it. They see it all the time. And we shouldn't really be surprised that children are growing up with huge problems when that is, at these formative, very delicate moments of their lives, that is what they're being subjected to. And there is almost no oversight. And it might sound very fusty. You have to take the phones away from them. You have to take them off social media.
I think we are moving into that territory. I really do think we are.
That we haven't got there before.
And most parents just simply aren't capable of managing this issue. It's a parenting issue, but people need to spend more time talking to kids. But once again, also we've got failures of social services to take action. So the kids. The kids don't have they don't have a proper bed. They don't have pajamas. They're not being fed properly. They've got a mother with mental illness, an absent father. But when he is there, he's beating them. Oh, but no, let's leave the kids there. So again, we now have so many children in such bad homes, with such bad parents, that we don't even bother rescuing those kids, right? And look, he's a killer. There is a family right now who have lost their son. Harvey Wilkes, his family have lost their son, and he's lost his whole life. But you've got another kid whose life could also perhaps have been saved by action. And we've got an overworked and overstretched social services. We've also got social services, by the way, working from home in many places. You can't be a social worker and work from home. End of, nothing to discuss. That's absolutely not, But we have got a disaster. I don't know how many more times we can see either a kid being killed or a kid killing, and we're just going to keep going. Again, like you were saying with the abuse, sex abuse by, illegal migrants. What is the level of children killing each other that we're going to accept as the norm before we don't even bother putting it on the front pages anymore?
Yeah, and I have to say...
Because black kids stabbing black kids in London, that's not even a news in brief anymore.
Oh, it's not?
Not even a news in brief.
Which is appalling, because it used to be the sort of thing that would occupy the nation for months if that had happened.
We just think it's just normal now.
Yeah.
It should never be normal.
No, it should never be normalised.
Absolutely.
And the reality is there needs to be an intervention at some point, because, as you say, it's the number of parents who are unable or unwilling to do these basic things.